So, we've got one package here, and two things that came in, but as usual we're covering non-anime stuff first, and there's actually a big pile of it. Not sure what the best order to go through here is. Basically, what happened was I was at Best Buy, because I kind of felt like watching some... I guess what I actually felt like watching is Star Wars, and I guess that won't arrive until next week's update, but... while I was there, I was kind of thinking, you know, there's all these old classic Disney animations, and I heard that How to Train Your Dragon 2 was actually pretty good, so I wanted to check them all out. So I got the Little Mermaid 3D version, Tarzan Special Edition, which has Blu-ray DVD, Sleeping Beauty Diamond Edition, which has Blu-ray DVD, Jungle Book Diamond Edition, which has Blu-ray DVD, Cinderella Diamond Edition, which has Blu-ray DVD, the Alice in Wonderland Blu-ray plus DVD, the Dumbo 70th Anniversary Edition Blu-ray plus DVD, the Hunchback of Notre Dame 3-disc Special Edition Blu-ray DVD, which includes both the Hunchback of Notre Dame and the second movie, and like I mentioned, How to Train Your Dragon 2 Blu-ray DVD collection version. So now that we got that out of the way, we can take these, set them down there. I told you those were arriving before, so what we really want to do is open this up and off so well. It is. So I guess we're just doing a hybrid opening. Bonk. Let's see. Can we put these in an order? That's an order. So to begin with, we've got Little Buster's Refrain. I guess before I do this, since the Blu-ray versions came out last week, I should grab those from the pile over there so that we can take a look. Because, like I've mentioned before, the way Sentai does their releases, you generally tend to have shared artwork. So if we take a look here, let's see, all the usual stuff. If we take a look on the inside, we're going to have 3 discs. And now, to satisfy our curiosity, let's take a quick look at the Blu-ray version from last week. And it looks like they're completely different images, which sometimes happens with Sentai releases. Yeah, completely different images. That's pretty cool. Next up we have Muv-Luv Alternative. Muv-Luv Alternative Total Eclipse. And that's all I talked about watching this. There's a part of me that just feels like putting it off a little bit, because part 2 comes out, I don't know, sometime in the near future, as a dub. So once again, we've got 3 discs. Now if we go over here and grab the Blu-ray version, we can see that looks like this one artwork is the same, which is usual, but the disc 2 artworks are the same this time. So that's pretty common for a Sentai release. Next up we have the Blu-ray release of A Channel, which as we can see here in the back is Japanese with English subtitles only, region A only, and I don't want to try and dig the DVD of this out. This is basically Sentai catching up on re-releasing a lot of their old stuff on Blu-ray. Stuff that they released on DVD before, but were probably popular enough to get a Blu-ray release. Let's see. There's a lot of Sentai releases this week. So next up, we've got the re-release of Maid-Sama with the new English dub and new English dub. I guess I should just open them up. This is heavy, so you can kind of tell there's 6 discs in here. Wow. It feels like it. Whoa. And then there's a little black plastic that got free. I wonder if we can... oh, right there. Take a little bit more off so it doesn't fall off elsewhere. Now let's open the Blu-ray version. It's 3 discs. Which makes sense. It's a 24 or 26 episode series. Somewhere along those lines. Probably says on the back. 27 episodes. Wow. That's a little bit more than expected. With a new English dub. Region A only. And this is the curious one because fitting 3 discs in a Blu-ray DVD size case makes sense. Fitting 6 in a DVD size case, well, it's been done a lot of times, and so it's interesting to see which one they went with. And this one is a pretty reasonable one, in my opinion. It'd be nice if a lot of the cheaper Stargate releases or whatnot like that were kind of like this. So let's see. I'm taking a look at these images again because I'm curious if there's overlap. So we can see that the disc ones are the same. Okay. Disc 4 and disc 2 share the same. And disc 3 and disc 6 share the same. It's a pretty cool little observation. And then finally, we've got a Log Horizon Collection 2, which I would say is my highest priority acquisition this week because I might actually fire it up after I start watching, or after I record this, once I get to the point where I'm processing videos. I can just relax and do nothing for the rest of the day, more or less. I mean, there's still a couple of important things on my to-do list. One of those includes picking up some milk and cereal. It's a bit low on that. So let's see. Region A, English dub, standard stuff, all the way up to episode 25. And based on where Log Horizon ended on the first half, it's hard to say if this will actually be a complete thing or if there's more to it. If I looked online, I'm sure I could find out. And then of course we got this. It looks like it's discs 1 and the same artwork as discs 1 and 2 from the DVD version. We've got disc 1 and disc 2. So that's this week's anime DVD collection update. So I finally pre-ordered next month's anime, and while doing that, of course, I got to catch up on some things. It's hard to remember exactly what I pre-ordered. It was a good thing I did do some stuff because I think there's some things that are getting released, actually maybe today, that weren't on my radar when I went shopping last month. Either I missed them or they just kind of got added late. It's mostly more... Oh, darn, I forgot what they're called. I think it's something like Eastern Star or something like that. I get plenty of their stuff when it comes out, and I think some of that stuff was released, and I guess it didn't just ship, but it's all whatever. It's pre-ordered now, and that's what's important. But looking at stuff that have shown up on the to-release list in the future, I actually noticed that Looking Up at the Half Moon was on there, and that's kind of important because that had been licensed before by maybe it was Crimson Star Media, maybe something like that. It was created by a guy I think by a guy who was just an anime fan who wanted to bring over some anime titles that I think he was thinking was left out. It's hard to get entirely into the mindset because they never actually released anything, because the founder, who maybe it was his vision or something like that, he got arrested for something or the other, and it got canceled, and so I was a little disappointed because it was one less anime to be released. I don't know the stats of whether or not he was actually guilty of anything or whatnot, honestly. At this point, it's nothing for me to care about. I was just disappointed I didn't get to see the anime, but well, it's coming out now, so it is whatever. I get to observe the industry, and I'm glad when it brings me stuff. But obviously, over this past week, I've been I've been really busy doing a whole lot of stuff, and I've just not felt a lot of pressure or desire to watch a lot of anime. I was in the middle of Nisekoi, which is subtitled, and of course, when I get busy, if I don't feel like I can pay a lot of attention to it, then things don't happen. And it's been more than just that. I've had brothers come over a couple times for some recording sessions and some recording sessions on my own and stuff. And I know y'all don't get to see a whole lot of it, but we're making progress behind the scenes. I think the biggest problem and the only reason why we haven't uploaded anything that y'all can see yet is we really need to come up with a simple intro for our little gaming stuff. Something that lets you know you're at the right video or something like that, so you don't watch a Quest for Glory video and then accidentally click on the Let's Play for somebody else playing Quest for Glory. You know, things that allow you to identify the video. Whether or not the content will be entertaining, it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if y'all see it, but I'll let y'all know when we actually get that channel set up and get things uploaded to it. Other than that, it's just hey, that's what Gigafrosty's doing. But, in terms of things I watched, obviously I did watch a handful of the Disney stuff I watched, or that I bought. And How to Train Your Dragon 2 is obviously not Disney, but I'm going to talk about it first just because, you know, it's on its own. It's the non-Disney thing that I watched, and I thought it was pretty good. It's one of those things where the original was pretty good. I mean, I think some people have commented about part of the reason you just enjoy the original one is there's a feeling about it like, I don't know, something that hits your, ooh, is that a cat sort of nerve? I mean, you can kind of see that Toothless kind of looks a little cat-like as far as a dragon can be. And I don't think that's a concept ever brought up in the first one, but it doesn't matter. It begins fun, introduces an interesting dialogue. It set off some of my Monster Hunter instincts in terms of, ooh, that would be really fun to hunt, but you'd have to watch it to understand what you mean, and of course you would have had to play Monster Hunter. So if you got both, then you'd be good to go. I'm going to put these in the order I watched them. I didn't watch How to Train Your Dragon 2 first. Actually, I watched Sleeping Beauty first because I wanted to see Maleficent, you know, because she's magnificent and malice kind of combined together, and she's just a really interesting villain. But it was really interesting watching this, and I kind of remember it being kind of bigger movie than it actually was. There's something there about passage of time and being able to grasp the entirety of the story as it progresses in your mind, you being used to doing that sort of thing. And it's interesting because I think I commented a couple weeks ago about how in 2001 A Space Odyssey almost nothing happens. And it felt like the same was with this. Actually, it's felt the same for a lot of things, but it's not necessarily bad because for something like Sleeping Beauty, the original story is one that's kind of simple and could be told verbally pretty easily within, I don't know, 30 minutes if you really wanted to. I mean, you could tell it much faster if you wanted to. You could read the Wikipedia synopsis. But it just feels like there's elements to the story that I used to think were more fleshed out, but it's interesting how nostalgia kind of does that. But it's also interesting how a lot of the reason for that is because these movies go for entertaining you other than from the story itself. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Disney's pretty much adapting pretty pretty simple stories in their own right. Like I said, you could verbally tell it in a short period of time. And so there's questions of how do you make something like that entertaining, what do you add to it, and you know, Disney kind of established this idea that with an animated movie you can do a lot of musical related stuff. And I don't know that, I mean, Sleeping Beauty definitely had some of that stuff in it. But it occurred to me just how little we actually see of Maleficent, you know, watching it. I mean, most of the Maleficent stuff is just a couple times she shows up and then finale, pretty much. which is unfortunate, but at least we have Kingdom Hearts if we want to see more of her. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's more Disney sequel movies in that universe sort of thing. I definitely didn't want to watch the live-action movie because I could kind of tell watching it that it wouldn't be particularly spectacular. Now, maybe some people think it is, and I don't know, but to me it just kind of seemed like they were trying to make Maleficent seem like a good person who was just screwed over by a man, or maybe it'd be more accurate to say a good girl screwed over by a man, and that felt kind of shallow. It's sort of like Hunchback 1 versus Hunchback 2, and I'll talk about that when I get there. Now, obviously, I'm holding Dumbo because I'm going to say that I watched that one, and it's along the same lines, although this one, I think the musical element is definitely stronger, more present. Like, there are some ways in which, Sleeping Beauty kind of goes for a different sort of mood with its singing than Dumbo does. It's also really interesting because I didn't realize that Dumbo was natively a 4:3 animation. Which makes me wonder if it was intended for TV or something like that, or if it's just really old and that was just the way things were done then. But, oh yes, that Pink Elephant song, that one is always spectacular. I watched The Jungle Book. I guess it's really hard to say what's been motivating me what to choose for these movies. Jungle Book's one that I feel like I just hadn't watched in a really long time and maybe not seen as much of. So it was really interesting watching it and realizing how much animation they reuse in it. I kind of get the impression that Disney around that time was looking at these things, and you know what? That's not necessarily a bad thing. And Jungle Book maybe didn't do it perfectly, but it did it pretty well, I thought. Things like some of the reused animation of the elephants turning around really stuck out, but I swear there's probably some Mowgli running off scenes that were the same in a whole bunch of them, and Disney of this era was definitely a different beast. I had heard about that, and one example that comes to mind is actually related to the Jungle Book in that there's a scene where Baloo in his costume is dancing with King Louie, and I remember seeing a demonstration how Robin Hood used that scene. They basically did rotoscoping, and I think I've talked about rotoscoping before and good and bad rotoscoping. I think that was actually a really good example of rotoscoping because once you have an idea for the basic movements you want to have happen, the truth of the matter is they weren't particularly lazy about it. What I mean by this is so Baloo and Little John are obviously both bear-shaped, and so those are pretty straightforward, but King Louie is an orangutan with really long arms, and the chicken lady that Little John was dancing with, she's a giant chicken, I tell you. Giant chicken. So, it's interesting to watch things like that, and I think it's okay animation history, and Jungle Book is an interesting little story. And then I finished with the two Hunchback of Notre Dame movies. Assuming that there's only two, I'm hoping there's only two. The first one, of course, is... I think it's pretty great. I think for most people it's a mixed bag, but for me, when a mixed bag has just solidly great elements and then some meh elements that maybe kind of clash, it still tends to come out pretty good for me. Like, I can appreciate the things about the movie that really stand out, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame has some... heavy religious elements in there. They're just like... I'm thinking of the Bells of Notre Dame song, which is the intro song, I believe. And the way that one ends, and I guess his name is on the back here, so I don't have to remember. I don't see it anywhere. But the bad guy... the song talks about him feeling the fear for his immortal soul, and you can just kind of feel the way his own internal fear is just really expressed there. That's really great. I mean, the villain in this one is great just because it's a simple concept that's
performed very well, and it's a very realistic concept. It doesn't feel like a caricature. You kind of feel like there are probably people around who either were him or would have been him if they had been given means, motive, and opportunity. I mean, he's a good villain, and a lot of people kind of express this in terms of the song Hellfire, which is pretty much the villain theme song, or the villain song of this movie, and is, some people think it's the best villain song of any of them, and that says a lot considering we got the Lion King's Be Prepared, which is also quite spectacular. And then, of course, the conclusion of the conflict. You know, there's a lot of powerful imagery in the movie, and some of the jokes are actually really funny. It was really interesting watching it, realizing that Captain America from the new Avengers movie could watch it and get all the references. If you don't know what I mean, then I guess I won't talk too much about it, but it's fun. I thought it was fun. And I guess I'm one of those people who finds it fun. It's a bit like Hercules in terms of being a mixture of, there's some serious element in there, but they just throw gags at you, and I think some people really don't like this mixture of some dark with huge gags sort of thing to it, but I kind of enjoy it, especially since it creates an interesting contrast between the scenes that are really important when they stop throwing gags at you for a brief moment because something really important is happening, and I don't know, it's a weird thing. So this also came with the Hunchback of Notre Dame 2, which I had not seen before, and I decided to give it a watch just because if you've watched Hunchback, you kind of know that there's one thing, it's kind of left hanging, not exactly, but it's one of those things that kind of make it good, an unresolved issue that we normally would have expected to not be kind of unresolved, but at the same time, maybe never expect. I don't know. If you watch the movie, you probably know what I'm talking about, because the second movie is quite clearly about that sort of thing. And what can I say about the second movie? It's about what you would expect from a Disney sequel to a previous movie, except for The Rescuers Down Under, which I do believe is an exception rather than the rule. So you could call it the exception that proves the rule. If you don't know what I mean by that, you got The Rescuers, and then some years later they did The Rescuers Down Under, and that was kind of a sequel to the first one, but not a direct sequel as in a sequel to the content of what happened in that, which tends to be most Disney sequels, I think. But instead it was a sequel in that it involved the titular characters, the Rescuers, except this time they were going to Australia, and this time, unlike all the other Disney sequels that come to mind, that one was actually another theatrical release, I think. So that's basically the major difference, is how much money Walt Disney Pictures puts behind these things. If they put a ton of it, if they expect it to be a feature film that they're going to show in theaters. If they're just going to go on a straight to DVD release, they're going to maybe go less of a budget. Sometimes if they make a sequel to that, they'll go even lesser of a budget. Maybe, I don't know. I haven't seen every single Disney sequel to every single Disney animated feature film, and which is obvious because I watched The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2, and I guess it was about what you'd expect. It was well animated for what it was, but at the same time, story elements are a little bit of a stretch. The villain, a big stretch. Like I talked about, for the first one, the villain was a simple but convincing villain, whereas in the second movie, it's a very stereotypical, oh, I'm obsessed with looking good, and I'm gonna just steal something villain. So, some of the character interactions didn't quite feel like it was the same characters, but that's par for the course, you know. Well, I guess that means most of my talking is about these Disney movies, but there's certainly a lot to think about, especially since animation, I mean, anime is important to me mostly because I'm a fan of animation and because the Japanese animation industry just provides a lot of interesting things that I also feel are fairly unique to the culture. It makes it interesting to explore it. But we can't ignore the Disney animated classics because those are the histories of most of these. A lot of the techniques for animation, Disney are the ones who figured out how to make things really happen. I'm thinking also of that depth camera they used for Bambi, or designed for Bambi, and I think there's just so many things that Disney came up with that I'm sure the anime industry has just been heavily influenced by in some ways, and it's kind of nice that it goes for full circle, and you get things like Avatar: The Last Airbender, which was clearly inspired by anime concepts. But I'm digressing. I should probably cover the other two things I watched. So, since Naruto Shippuden DVD set 21 arrived, obviously I watched that with my friend that I watched these with. I think we weren't exactly expecting it, especially since you look at it and it looked like it should be for the first Naruto. Not for Shippuden, the sequel series, but of course it was doing a flashback at the time. And it's hard to say what I thought about this, because it wasn't quite spectacular, but it wasn't necessarily bad. For the flashback stuff, I kind of had forgotten where we were in terms of that stuff and what the purpose of us being shown it was. But it was a lot more obvious, at least watching this, that the entire point was to actually show some of the events, some of the relevant events from the first Naruto, except more from the point of view of Sasuke. You know, because Naruto's been our main character, so we see a lot of it from his perspective. And we get insight into other characters plenty of times, but it felt to me like we were getting more insight into Sasuke's mind than we did before. I would have to re-watch the old stuff to find out, and as interested as I would be in doing that, that's also so time-consuming that I'm just not going to do it. And then after that, it's dealing with, well, I'm just trying to decide if this is spoiler to mention or not. But I guess they're trying to play it off as war, and a part of me thinks it's a little hit and miss in that regard. I mean, to a certain degree, it kind of doesn't feel like things are really too different, other than interaction of characters has changed somewhat. It still feels like it's very Leaf-focused, so hard to say what to make about that. And then there's one thing that I thought was a little cheap and it's hard to get as excited about, but I don't know if I can mention it because that would be a little spoilerific, which is a common problem here. If you watch DVD set 21 or see which episode it is, you probably have a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying it was necessarily bad, but you know, it just kind of feels like just cheap. There's a lot of things about it that are just like, oh, well, I just found out how to wave my hand and make this super impossible magical thing that can't ever be countered happen. That's part of the concept, but it extends a little bit beyond that in terms of stuff. Oh well, not bad, but, and it's not necessarily slow either. It almost seems like at times it could degrade into being slow, but it's being busy instead, which I guess is okay. It's pretty good. It's not the spectacular stuff that's happened before, but you know, even if I tried to compare to One Piece, you know, One Piece is still in the middle of stuff that may not be filler, but isn't exactly the spectacular things that drew us into the series. But you know, they come and go. So I guess that's the Naruto Shippuden DVD collection 21. And so the other thing I watched, I mentioned I was already watching, was Nisekoi Volume 2. And what can I say about it? Well, first, it's hard to remember exactly what I said about the first volume, but I'm pretty sure it was something along the lines of not being sure what to think about the series. And most of that was because one of the major girls, I just really don't like her at all. And that would be the gangster girl, of course. But when you get down to it, I guess it's because I think the gangsters are all just real scumbags. And it's one of those anime that thinks it's funny to do physical violence against the main character. And of course, I always have kind of problems with those. But it occurred to me that, the big problem is that the gangsters are just all pieces of shit. Except for the dad. I haven't seen him do anything wrong. Everybody else is just like trying to stir up trouble, trying to make shit up. And I guess a lot of that just stems from because the main guy is a Yakuza and the gangsters are the gangsters. It's one of those things where the Yakuza are just not going to be doing anything bad because the anime is not trying to do that kind of humor. Now, I'm saying some of that because going into Volume 2, of course, I vaguely remembered some of that stuff. And I think by Volume 2, it's actually getting better. There were some things about it that were just hilarious. I really liked The Bodyguard. I mean, I kind of saw some things coming in regard to that, but... And I did think that, again, being a gangster they weren't a particularly moral character, but they didn't just roll over and say, yeah, even though by all accounts we've established that our main character should be getting his ass kicked, he actually does some pretty impressive stuff, I thought. Nothing spectacular. Actually, if there's a missed moment, I remember when the first episode began, we saw the main character making meal for all of the Yakuza people in his family or whatnot. A part of me couldn't help but feel like, okay, we've established that the main character is actually pretty decent at cooking. I mean, to cook for that many people, you generally have to really know your way around a kitchen. You have to be able to time things right, because with those quantities of servings, if you have one thing and then you start another thing, the first thing's just going to be completely gone. So you kind of have to know how to manage a kitchen. So I thought he's a really good cook, and there was an episode here where they were doing an outdoor school trip thing, and they were making curry, and I was kind of hoping it would explore the cooking stuff, because, especially since the main character just kind of snapped and immediately started taking control of doing the cooking stuff, and it would have been interesting if characters made observations about it. They didn't, which isn't a big problem, but it feels like a missed opportunity. The episode instead was about something, I don't know. I'm just concerned because I guess like some people, it's not, I can't help but look at it and say, it's looking like this anime is definitely not going to have the girl I don't hate maybe getting together, and maybe it's going to set up the girl I do hate. And they've got a lot to overcome in terms of making me accept her. I mean, in certain ways, maybe it could be getting better, but I don't know. There's excuses to be made about stuff like, I think I was talking about this with Tari, where the vice principal was, she was just an enormous cunt. She had something crawled up her butt and died or something. It was just, whoa, such a hateable character, and I understood some of the stress she was going through, but at the same time, it just does not excuse her general mindset. I mean, it's sort of like when you go on a date with somebody, one of the things you're supposed to do if you go out to eat at a restaurant is pay attention to how your date is interacting with the wait staff. Because while this isn't a universally true statement, usually they're putting on their best behavior to you, but if they're the kind of person that has a very shallow relationship, then seeing that they just think poorly of the wait staff for reasons that are just silly things, and it kind of comes down to that, where even if somebody's putting on a good face, if they're choosing to interact with other people poorly because, I don't know, the last time they made a waiter, they were splashed in the face with hot water or something on accident, it's still the sort of thing where you have to understand that accidents happen. And even if you're angry, you have to be able to identify that you're angry about something and not needlessly take it out on people. And so if you're the kind of person that would take it out on people, it indicates that you're not a pretty good person. Which is a very weird side about the Tari thing and then about Nisekoi, but it's all craziness and it's all people telling stories anyway, so there's a bit of unrealism to it. But I have to say that Volume 2 was definitely had some really amusing moments in it, and obviously I've talked about some of them, but the whispering scene was hilarious. And even though there was a lot of things in there where I was wincing, at the same time I was just saying, this is actually a fun turn of events. Oh well, you win some, you lose some, right? So, instead of cutting off to a summary video, I think I already talked way too much about the Disney stuff, so I'm going to apologize about that, and I'm just going to go ahead and update this time and say y'all have a nice week.